He walked out of the federal courthouse in Oakland in handcuffs while she stood across the street, holding the judgment that stripped his name off the code they built together. Lauren Pierce watched through designer sunglasses she did not pay for, standing on pavement still warm from the California afternoon sun. The crowd of reporters had not noticed her yet. They were too busy shouting questions at Colin Ward, her ex-husband, her former partner, the man who had spent 3 years telling the world he was a genius while she fixed his broken algorithms at 3 in the morning. The internet had already made up its mind about her. Trending hashtags called her the gold digger who ran to a Malibu billionaire the second her marriage fell apart. Comment sections painted her as bitter, jealous, and desperate for attention. Nobody seemed to care that she was the original architect of the software that made the company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Nobody wanted to hear that every line of code Colin claimed as his own had her fingerprints buried in the commit logs. But the man whose beach house she now called home was not her lover. Not yet, anyway. Brandon Cole owned a stretch of Carbon Beach in Malibu, the famous billionaire's beach where tech money and old Hollywood money lived behind tall gates and tinted glass. His home was clean, modern, and quiet, with walls that opened to the Pacific and furniture that looked expensive but never showy. He had given her a guest suite with an ocean view and a locked door, and he had never once asked for anything in return except the truth. What he wanted was justice. What she wanted was her name back. The alliance between them was built on something sharper than romance. A quiet legal war against a man who had stolen her work, lied to investors, and made millions while she stayed silent in the background, believing that loyalty and love were the same thing. What would you do if the person you trusted most stole your life's work and made the world believe you were crazy? Have you ever been blamed for something you did not do, while the real person who caused the damage smiled for the cameras? Lauren Pierce is watching her ex-husband head toward a prison sentence, but the internet still thinks she is the villain. The night before, she had stood on the balcony of Brandon's Malibu home in a simple cotton robe, the kind you buy at Target, not the kind that comes with a billionaire's lifestyle. The sliding glass door had opened behind her, and for a second, she had seen Brandon's reflection in the darkened glass. Bare chest, loose pants, hair still damp from a shower. He stepped away without saying a word, giving her space she had not asked for but desperately needed. The moment had felt heavy with something unspoken, a tension that lived somewhere between respect and desire, but neither of them had crossed that line. Stay with this story to see how her silence turned into the sharpest weapon she ever had. Before this story goes deeper, tell me in the comments, have you ever stayed quiet, not because you were weak, but because you were planning your next move? To understand how a quiet engineer ended up in a billionaire's beach mansion while her ex walked toward prison, we need to go back to the very first lie. That night, alone in her room with the sound of waves crashing just beyond the window, Lauren opened her phone and stared at a drafted post. It was a tell-all, raw and angry, the kind of thing that would go viral in minutes and destroy what was left of Colin's reputation before the sentencing even happened. Her thumb hovered over the publish button. Then she deleted it. Not yet, she whispered to the empty room. Long before the handcuffs and headlines, there was just a cramped apartment near San Jose and a couple who believed they were building a future together. Laura met Colin at a hackathon in Oakland 6 years earlier. She had been the only woman on her team, used to being overlooked, and he had been the guy with the pitch that made investors lean forward in their chairs. He was charming in a way that felt easy and natural, the kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 3 new friends and 2 business cards. She was the opposite, quiet, focused, more comfortable with code than conversation. But when he looked at her work that night, really looked at it, something shifted. He called her brilliant. He said she thought in ways most engineers could not. And when he suggested they work together, she believed him when he said, "We are one team." The early days were ramen dinners and late nights, laptops balanced on a kitchen table that doubled as a desk, extension cords snaking across the floor to keep their servers running in the corner. They worked side by side, her writing the core algorithms while he handled the business side, pitches, meetings, investor calls. It felt balanced. It felt real. The first red flag was small, easy to ignore. They had gone to a casual meetup for Bay Area founders, the kind of thing where people stood around with cheap beer and talked about funding rounds. When someone asked about the product, Colin smiled and said, "My wife helps with the tech side." Helps. Not builds. Not architects. Helps. Lauren had laughed it off at the time, told herself he was just simplifying things for a crowd that did not care about technical details. But the word had stuck in her chest like a splinter she could not reach. Still, there were good moments. There was the night they closed their first small angel investment, barely enough to cover 6 months of expenses, but it felt like winning the lottery. Colin had pulled her onto his lap, right there at the kitchen table, kissing her between lines of code, laughing about how they were going to change everything. The line between partnership and passion had blurred in the best way, or so she thought. She had felt wanted, needed, like they were building something bigger than either of them could create alone. Have you ever ignored a small red flag because the dream in front of you felt too good to risk? Tell me in the comments if you have been there. But then the email came. It was late on a Tuesday, one of those nights when Lauren was still awake at midnight, debugging a feature that kept crashing during demos. Colin had gone to bed hours earlier, leaving her alone with the glow of her monitor and a cold cup of coffee. Her inbox pinged, and she glanced at the preview without thinking much of it. The subject line read, Provisional Patent Application, Ward Technologies. It was addressed to Colin. Only Colin. Attached were her code samples, her architecture diagrams, her notes, all labeled as supporting materials. Her name was nowhere on the filing. The first time Lauren saw her work under someone else's name, it was not on a billboard. It was buried in legal paperwork she was never meant to read. She confronted Colin the next morning over coffee, trying to keep her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. He had smiled, that same easy smile that used to make her feel safe, and explained it away like it was nothing. "It is just simpler this way for now," he said, pouring milk into his mug without looking at her. "You know how investors are. They want a clear story, one founder with a vision. We can update it later, once we have more traction. This does not change anything between us." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the man she had built a life with would not lie to her face while stealing her work. So she said okay. She said she trusted him, and she watched him kiss her on the forehead like she was a child who needed reassurance instead of a partner who deserved honesty. 2 weeks later, they were standing in the lobby of a downtown San Francisco patent office, all glossy floors and men in suits carrying leather briefcases. Lauren felt out of place in jeans and a hoodie, her laptop bag slung over one shoulder. Colin looked like he belonged there, shaking hands with the attorney, laughing at some inside joke she was not part of. The paperwork was filed. The patents went through. Colin's name was on every single page. Hers was not. Have you ever been reassured with affection when what you really needed was honesty? Drop a comment if you have felt that kind of confusion. They rode the elevator down in silence. Lauren stared at their reflection in the mirrored walls, watching Colin stand just a little too close, his hand resting on the small of her back in a way that used to feel protective but now felt possessive. When the elevator doors opened, he turned to her, pressing her gently against the mirrored wall, kissing her until her doubts started to blur. He whispered about their future, about the house they would buy, the life they would build, the success that was just around the corner. And for a moment, she let herself believe that love and partnership could still be the same thing. But that night, when she got home and opened her laptop, she noticed something new. Colin had started locking his office door during investor calls. It was a small thing, a nothing thing, but it was also everything. The networking trips started small. One weekend in New York, another in Austin, until his suitcase stayed packed more often than it was put away. Colin called them opportunities. Investor dinners, partnership meetings, influencer events that could get them press coverage and connections they could not buy. Every trip came with the same speech. "This is for us. This is how we grow." But Lauren was not invited. She stayed behind, grinding through product milestones alone, fixing bugs and building features while he posted photos from rooftop bars and conference stages. He would call her late at night from hotel rooms, his voice half distracted, music and laughter in the background. She could hear women laughing. She could hear him laughing back. Just networking. He would say when she asked who he was with. You know how this world works. You have to play the game. She did not want to play that game. She wanted to build something real. There were nights when she sat alone at her desk at 2 in the morning, the glow of her monitor the only light in the room, listening to his voice on speakerphone from some bar 3 time zones away. He sounded different on those calls, more performative, like he was talking to her, but thinking about someone else. She started scrolling through the photos people tagged him in. Women in red dresses. Women leaning close. Women who looked like they belonged in his new world in ways Lauren never would. Have you ever watched someone you love change as success got closer, like you were being pushed to the side of your own story? Share your thoughts below. The trips got longer. The explanations got shorter. And Lauren kept working, kept building, kept believing that if she just did enough, he would remember why they started this together. Then a coworker accidentally forwarded her a photo. It was from a New York party, some startup launch event at a rooftop venue with city lights glittering in the background. Colin was in the center of the frame, smiling wide, his arm around a woman in a red dress. Their faces were close. Too close. The caption read, "Future Mrs. Ward?" It was meant as a joke. The coworker had sent it to the wrong group chat and immediately followed up with apologies, saying it was just gossip, just people being messy. But Lauren stared at that photo for 20 minutes straight, watching the way Colin's hand rested on the woman's waist, the way he leaned into her like she was the only person in the room. She saved the image. She did not say a word. Sometimes betrayal does not come with a confession. It arrives as a low-resolution photo attached to a casual email. Lauren waited until Colin came home from that trip. She did not ambush him at the door. She did not scream or throw things. She waited until he was settled, unpacked, comfortable. Then she opened her laptop, pulled up the photo, and turned the screen toward him without saying a word. He barely glanced at it before he started talking. "That is nothing," he said, shaking his head like she was being ridiculous. "That is just networking. You're reading into something that does not exist. You were kissing her. I was not kissing her. We were talking. Someone took a photo at a bad angle. You're being insecure, Lauren. This is what I have to do to get us ahead. Do you think investors care about code? They care about relationships. They care about who they like. And if you keep acting ungrateful every time I come home, maybe you need to ask yourself why you do not trust me." He flipped it. He always flipped it. Suddenly, she was the one apologizing. She was the one who had overreacted, who had let her insecurities get the best of her, who did not understand how the business world worked. He held her face in his hands, looked her in the eyes, and told her he loved her. He told her she was the only one who mattered. And then he kissed her. It was not gentle. It was urgent, almost rough, the kind of kiss designed to shut down a conversation instead of continuing it. He pulled her close, hands gripping her waist, turning the argument into something physical, something that felt like intimacy, but tasted like control. That night, they ended up in bed. But Lauren lay awake afterward, staring at the ceiling, feeling his arm across her stomach like a weight she could not move. Have you ever been kissed right after an argument and wondered if it was love or control? Tell me how you read that situation. The next morning, she woke up early and walked into the kitchen to make coffee. Colin was already on the phone in the other room, his voice low and confident, talking to someone about next steps and investor strategy. She heard him say it clearly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Yeah, as the founder, I think we are positioned really well for the next round." The founder, not we, not co-founders, just him. Lauren poured her coffee in silence, staring out the window at the gray San Jose morning, and realized something she had been trying not to see for months. She was disappearing. In public, he was the genius who built everything. At home, she was the one fixing his bugs at 3 in the morning. Lauren started seeing herself disappear in real time. Tech blogs published interviews with Colin where her name never came up. Headlines called him a self-taught wonder, a visionary who had built a company from scratch. They quoted lines about algorithm design and data architecture. Lines Lauren had written in her notes months earlier, words Colin had lifted without changing a single comma. One article described him as a rare breed of founder who can code and sell, praising his technical depth and business skills. Lauren read it sitting in a crowded coffee shop in Palo Alto, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She watched a live stream of Colin on stage at a tech conference in Austin, speaking confidently about optimization strategies she had taught him during late-night debugging sessions back when she still believed they were partners. The audience clapped. People tweeted clips of his talk with fire emojis and praise. Someone in the live chat wrote, "This guy is the future." Lauren closed her laptop before she threw it across the room. The shame was the worst part. Not anger, shame. Shame that she had let this happen. Shame that she had stayed quiet for so long, believing that hard work would speak for itself. Shame that she had trusted a man who smiled at her in private while erasing her in public. For the first time, a thought pushed its way in her mind, small and sharp like a knife sliding between ribs. What if I walked away? She did not say it out loud. She barely let herself think it. But once the idea was there, it would not leave. Have you ever watched someone take credit for your work, smiling for applause you earned? Comment yes if that hits close to home. A week later, Colin flew to San Francisco for a major pitch event. Lauren went with him, standing in the wings backstage while he charmed a room full of investors. When he came off stage, riding the high of their applause, he grabbed her by the waist and kissed her hard, right there in front of everyone. It should have felt like affection. It should have felt like he was including her in his victory. But it did not. It felt like she was a trophy he had just won. Something shiny to hold up and show off. Proof that he had it all. The company, the fame, the girl. She pulled back and forced a smile, and he did not notice the difference. That night, back at the condo, her phone buzzed with a message from someone she barely knew. A junior engineer who had worked on their team for a few months before moving to another startup. The message was short. "You should see this." Attached was a PDF. Lauren opened it, and her stomach dropped. It was an early draft of the company's IPO filing, leaked from somewhere deep inside the investor pipeline. And in 12 neat pages, her entire future had been erased. The document that changed everything did not come from a lawyer or a judge. It came as a PDF with her future erased in 12 neat pages. Lauren sat at the kitchen table in their condo at midnight, the only light coming from her laptop screen. The freeway hummed faintly in the distance. Colin was asleep in the bedroom, snoring lightly, unaware that everything was about to break. She read the filing 3 times, hoping she had misunderstood. But there was no misunderstanding. Colin Ward was listed as sole founder and lead architect. The company history described him as the visionary who had built the platform from the ground up, self-funding the early days and attracting investor interest through his technical talent and business vision. There was a section about key employees, a vague thank you to the team, but her name appeared nowhere. Not as co-founder, not as architect, not even as an early contributor. She had been written out of her own story. Lauren scrolled through the document slowly, her hands shaking, circling every lie with a digital highlighter. Patents listed under his name only. Code attributed to his direction. Investor pitches framed as his alone. The narrative was airtight, polished, and completely false. She thought about all the nights they had stayed up late, tangled in bed, dreaming out loud about what it would feel like to ring the bell on Wall Street together. He had held her close, whispered about their future, promised her that when the company went public, they would celebrate as equals. He had lied. If you discovered your partner had wiped your name from the future you built together, what would be your first move? Confrontation, silence, or revenge? Tell me in the comments. Lauren printed the entire filing. She laid the pages out on the living room floor, one by one, circling every false claim in red pen. By the time she was done, the floor looked like a crime scene. She sat back on her heels, staring at the evidence spread out in front of her, and whispered the words she had been trying not to say for months. He took everything, not just credit, not just recognition. He had taken her work, her ideas, her labor, and her name, and he had built a fortune on top of it while the world cheered him on. And the worst part was that she had let him. She had believed in partnership. She had believed in love. She had believed that if she just kept working, kept building, kept proving her worth, he would eventually do the right thing. But there was no right thing coming. There was only this, a legal document that proved he had planned to erase her all along. Lauren stood up slowly, her legs stiff from sitting on the floor for hours. She walked to the window and looked out at the San Francisco skyline, the lights of the city glittering like promises no one intended to keep. She was done waiting for him to see her. She was done hoping he would change. It was time to make sure the world saw the truth. The same internet that had ignored her suddenly knew her name, but only as a punchline. It started with a single tech blog post, published 3 days after Lauren had quietly shown the leaked IPO filing to a trusted contact in the investor community. The headline read, "Jealous wife tries to derail billion-dollar IPO with last-minute claims." The article framed her as bitter, unstable, and desperate for attention. It painted Colin as a hardworking founder being dragged down by a spouse who could not handle his success. The piece included anonymous quotes from sources close to the company, calling her claims baseless and calling her behavior a sad attempt to cash in before the IPO. By noon, the post had been shared 10,000 times. By evening, the meme started. Someone made a fake screenshot of Lauren with the caption, "When he builds a company and you think helping means you own it." Another showed Colin looking stressed with the text, "Imagine grinding for years just to have your ex try to steal your moment." A third was just her LinkedIn photo with the word jealous stamped across it in bold letters. The internet had decided she was the villain, and once the internet decides, there is no appeal process. Have you ever been talked about by people who don't know you at all? Did you keep quiet or fight back? Share your story below. Lauren sat on the bathroom floor of their condo, the shower running to cover the sound of her crying, scrolling through comment sections that tore her apart with words she would never forget. People called her a gold digger, a liar, a fraud. They said she was trying to ruin a good man because she could not handle being left behind. They said she should be ashamed. Colin found her there an hour later. He knocked softly on the door, his voice gentle and concerned, asking if she was okay. She opened the door, eyes red and swollen, and he pulled her into his arms. "I'm so sorry this is happening to you," he said, stroking her hair. "People are cruel. They don't know the real story." But his voice felt wrong. His touch felt wrong. And when she looked up at his face, she saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not concern, but calculation. He was not comforting her. He was managing her. She pulled away. "Did you leak the story?" she asked quietly. "What? No, of course not. Lauren, I would never." "Then how did they know I saw the filing?" He paused for just a second too long. "I don't know. Maybe someone at the firm. Maybe it was one of your contacts. You can't blame me for how people react to." "Get out. Lauren, get out of the bathroom. Get out of my space. Just go." He left, but not before giving her one last look, half hurt, half annoyed, like she was the one being unreasonable. That night, Colin tried to comfort her again. He came to bed late, sliding under the covers and reaching for her with soft touches and softer words, trying to pull her close. But when his hand brushed her arm, she flinched. Her body knew before her mind fully accepted it. She was not safe with him anymore. She lay awake for hours after he fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, listening to him breathe, and realizing that the man beside her was a stranger she had built a life with. The next morning, while Colin was in the shower, Lauren pulled a suitcase out of the closet. She moved quietly, methodically, packing only what mattered: her laptop, her external hard drives, one change of clothes. She took her wedding ring off and placed it on the kitchen counter next to the condo key. Then she opened her phone and bought a one-way ticket to Los Angeles. She did not leave a note. She did not wait for him to come out of the bathroom. She simply walked out the door and let the silence say everything she could not. She did not slam a door. She did not leave a note. She simply stepped into the hallway and let the silence say everything. The streets of San Jose were empty at dawn. Lauren stood on the sidewalk outside their condo building, suitcase wheels rattling against the pavement as she walked toward the corner where her rideshare was waiting. The sky was gray and soft, the kind of early morning light that makes everything feel unreal. She had spent years in that building, years waking up next to Colin, years believing they were building something together, years convincing herself that partnership and love could survive anything if you just worked hard enough. But some things do not survive. Some things just end. Lauren climbed into the back of the car, gave the driver a polite nod, and watched the condo building disappear behind her as they pulled away. She felt nothing. No relief. No regret. Just a strange, hollow quiet where all her feelings used to be. At the airport, she sat at the gate with her laptop bag on her knees, waiting for her flight to board. Around her, people moved with purpose, business travelers in suits, families heading to vacations, college kids going home. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that the woman sitting alone in the corner had just walked away from everything she knew. For a moment, Lauren let herself remember the first time Colin had kissed her. It was at a hackathon in Oakland, late at night, both of them exhausted and running on coffee and adrenaline. He had looked at her like she was the most interesting person in the room, and when he leaned in, she had felt chosen. Now, sitting alone at the gate, she realized that what she had felt was not love. It was relief. Relief that someone saw her. Relief that someone wanted her. But being wanted is not the same as being valued. She closed her eyes and shut the memory down, the same way she would close a window on her laptop. Quick, clean, final. Have you ever left a situation without explaining yourself because you knew no explanation would be heard? Comment, I left if you have had to walk away quietly. On the plane, Lauren opened her laptop and stared at a blank email draft. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a long time before she started typing. The message was addressed to Brandon Cole, one of the major investors in Colin's company, a billionaire known for his early bets on tech startups and his reputation for being ruthless when people lied to him. Lauren had never met him. She had no reason to believe he would listen to her, but she had nothing left to lose. She kept the email short and careful, offering just enough information to get his attention without sounding unhinged. She hinted that the core code everyone believed Colin had written was actually hers. She mentioned the IPO filings and suggested that if he looked closely, he would find that his money was tied to lies that could unravel everything. She attached a single file, a commit log showing her username on every major code update from the first year of the company. Then she hit send before she could change her mind. The plane took off, and Lauren watched the Bay Area shrink beneath her, the place where she had spent years disappearing, now just a grid of lights getting smaller and smaller until it was gone. She did not know if he would even read it, but if he did, she could burn down the life that had erased her. Lauren checked into a budget motel near LAX, the kind of place with thin walls and a neon sign that buzzed too loud. The room smelled faintly of old carpet and cleaning supplies, and the bed was hard, but it was hers. No one knew where she was. No one could find her unless she wanted to be found. She sat on the edge of the bed with her laptop balanced on her knees, staring at her inbox, refreshing it every few minutes, even though she knew it was pointless. Brandon Cole was a billionaire. He probably got 1,000 emails a day. The chances he had even seen her message were close to zero. But 3 hours later, her inbox pinged. The reply was a single line. If what you say is real, meet me in Malibu tomorrow. Bring proof. Lauren read it 5 times, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was it. This was the moment where she either walked into a trap or walked into the fight of her life. She typed back, I'll be there. Across the city, in a sleek office in Santa Monica with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific, Brandon Cole sat at his desk, staring at the commit log Lauren had sent. He had been in the tech world long enough to recognize real work when he saw it, and the timestamps, the complexity, the style, all of it pointed to someone who knew what they were doing. He pulled up a video clip from one of Colin's launch events, the kind of polished presentation investors loved. In the background, just barely visible, stood a woman. She was not smiling. She was not performing. She was just standing there, steady and quiet, watching Colin take the stage. Brandon paused the video and zoomed in on her face. There was something in her eyes, something sharp and tired and true, that stayed with him longer than it should have. He opened her email again and read it one more time. Then he forwarded it to his head of security with instructions to run a full background check and have someone ready at the Carbon Beach house tomorrow. Would you risk angering powerful investors to tell them the truth? Or would you stay out of it and move on? Drop your honest answer below. The next morning, Lauren stood outside Brandon Cole's Malibu home, staring at the tall gate and the ocean beyond it. She had worn jeans and a plain shirt, carrying her laptop bag like armor. She did not know what to expect. Another polished liar. Another man who would smile and promise things he had no intention of delivering. The gate buzzed open, and she walked up the stone path to the front door. A man in his early 40s answered, tall, lean, dressed in simple clothes that probably cost more than her rent. His eyes were sharp, assessing, but not unkind. "Lauren Pierce?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm Brandon Cole. Come in." He led her through the house to an open living room with glass walls facing the Pacific. The furniture was expensive but understated, nothing showy, nothing loud. Just clean lines and open space and the sound of waves hitting the sand just beyond the deck. Brandon gestured to a chair. Lauren sat, pulling her laptop out and setting it on the table between them. She had prepared a folder full of evidence: commit logs, emails, early prototypes, patents filed under Colin's name with her code attached. She laid it all out, one piece at a time, while Brandon listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then both of them reached for the same printed commit log at the same time. Their hands brushed. The contact was brief, accidental, but the eye contact that followed held a charge neither of them expected. Brandon pulled his hand back first. "If this is true," he said slowly, "I can stop that IPO." Lauren's breath caught. "And your ex," he continued, his voice calm but cold, "will have a much bigger problem than you. Have you ever expected to meet a villain and instead met someone who respected you more than the people you loved? Tell me how that changed you." Lauren stared at him, tried to read his face for signs of manipulation, for the angle she knew had to be there. But all she saw was focus. He was not looking at her like a problem to solve or a woman to manage. He was looking at her like someone who had built something real and deserved to be heard. "Why would you help me?" she asked quietly. "You invested in Colin's company. If I'm right, you lose money. A lot of money." Brandon leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable for a moment. "I invested in a company I thought was built on real work," he said. "If I was lied to, I want to know. And if someone stole your code and used my money to do it, then I have a bigger problem than a bad investment. I have a fraud problem." He paused, then added, "I don't like being lied to, and I don't like watching people get erased." Lauren felt something shift in her chest, a small, cautious flicker of hope she had been trying not to feel. Brandon closed the folder in front of him and looked up, his eyes locked on hers. "If this is true," he said, "I can stop that IPO, and your ex will have a much bigger problem than you." He could have offered her comfort first and contracts later, but the first thing Brandon Cole offered her was a lawyer. Lauren sat across from him in the same living room where she had just laid out years of stolen work, waiting for the catch. There was always a catch. Men like Brandon did not help women like her without expecting something in return. She had learned that lesson the hard way. But instead of leaning in close or offering reassurances that felt too warm, Brandon pulled out his phone and made a call. "Erica," he said when someone answered, "I need you to meet with someone tomorrow. Her name is Lauren Pierce. This is a priority." He listened for a moment, then said, "Intellectual property theft. Possibly fraud. I'll send you the files tonight." He hung up and looked at Lauren. "Erica Sloan is the best lawyer I know for this kind of case. She's handled investor disputes, patent battles, and she does not lose. I'll cover the costs. You focus on the evidence." Lauren blinked. "Why would you do that?" "Because if what you showed me is real, then I was part of the problem. I wrote checks to a company built on lies. That makes this my fight, too." She wanted to believe him, but trust was not something she gave easily anymore. Brandon seemed to sense her hesitation. He stood up and gestured toward a hallway. "There's a guest suite upstairs. Ocean view, private entrance, lock on the door. You can stay here while we build the case. It's safer than a motel, and you won't have to worry about Colin tracking you down. You want me to move in?" Lauren's voice came out sharper than she meant it to. "I want you to have a secure place to work," Brandon said evenly. "This is not a favor. It's strategy. If we're going to take this to court, you need to be somewhere he can't intimidate you. And you need space to focus." He walked to the hallway and opened a door. "This is yours if you want it. No strings. No expectations. Just a place to stay while we figure this out." Lauren stepped into the room. It was simple but luxurious. Clean white linens, a desk facing the ocean, large windows that led in the late afternoon light. It felt safe. It felt quiet. It felt like the opposite of every cramped, chaotic space she had lived in while building Colin's empire. Would you move into a powerful stranger's home if it meant safety and a chance at justice? Or would you sleep on a couch somewhere and fight alone? She turned back to Brandon. I don't know you. I know, he said, but you know your work. And you know he stole it. That's enough for now. Lauren set her bag down by the desk. Okay, but I'm paying you back when this is over. Brandon nodded once. Deal. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. There's food in the kitchen. Help yourself. And if you need anything, I'm downstairs. Then he left, closing the door behind him. Lauren stood alone in the guest suite, listening to the sound of waves through the open window, and realized she had just made a choice that would change everything. Later that night, she was unpacking her laptop when she heard footsteps in the hallway. She opened the door, still wearing the oversized sweatshirt and lounge pants she had changed into after a shower, her hair damp and loose around her shoulders. Brandon was walking past, dressed in a t-shirt and jeans, holding a mug of coffee. He stopped when he saw her, his eyes flicking over her for just a second before he looked away quickly, like he was fighting something he did not want to feel. You okay? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Yeah, Lauren said, just settling in. He nodded, gave her a brief, polite smile, and kept walking. But Lauren stood in the doorway for a long time after he disappeared down the stairs, her pulse racing in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Late that night, her phone buzzed. An email from Erica Sloan with attachments. Lauren opened them and started reading. The legal documents laid out everything. How deeply Colin had tied her work to his lies, how the patents were filed, how the investor agreements were structured. It was worse than she thought. He had not just erased her. He had built an entire legal wall to keep her out. But now, for the first time, she had someone on her side who knew how to fight back. If code was her first language, evidence became her second. The law office in downtown Los Angeles was all glass and steel, the kind of place where every surface gleamed and every conversation felt like it mattered. Lauren sat at a long conference table covered in printed emails, sticky notes, and USB drives, while Erica Sloan moved through the evidence like a surgeon planning an operation. Erica was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, the kind of lawyer who did not waste time on small talk or reassurances. She asked questions that cut straight to the point, and when Lauren answered, Erica listened like every word was a piece of a puzzle she was putting together in real time. Walk me through the first patent filing again, Erica said, tapping a pen against her notepad. When did you first see your code attached to his name? Lauren pulled up the file on her laptop. Here, this email from the patent attorney. It was addressed to Colin only, but my architecture diagrams were in the attachments. I asked him about it, and he said it was simple to file under one name for now. He promised we would update it later. Erica's expression did not change, but Lauren saw the slight tightening around her eyes. And you believed him. I wanted to, Lauren said quietly. That's what he counted on, Erica replied. She made a note on her legal pad. People like Colin Ward don't succeed because they're smart. They succeed because they're good at making people doubt themselves. Brandon had been funding everything, the lawyer, the research, the document requests, but he stayed out of the strategy. He showed up to a few meetings, listened quietly from the corner of the room, and then left without trying to steer the case. It was strange. Lauren had expected him to take over, to treat her like a project he was managing. But he did not. He just made sure she had what she needed and then stepped back. The days were long. Lauren spent 14-hour stretches reconstructing commit histories, pulling old emails from backup drives, matching timestamps to product releases. She built spreadsheets that mapped her work to Colin's public claims, color-coding every line in red. It was exhausting, but it was also empowering. For the first time in years, Lauren felt like she was building something that belonged to her. Have you ever turned your pain into a project, something detailed, focused, and powerful? Comment focus if you have ever done that to keep going. One night, after a particularly brutal day of depositions and document review, Brandon drove Lauren back to Malibu. They did not talk much in the car. She was too tired to make conversation. and he seemed to understand that. When they got to the house, instead of going inside, Brandon walked her down to the sand. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the wind coming off the ocean was cool and sharp. Lauren stood at the edge of the water, letting the waves wash over her feet, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself breathe. "You're doing good work," Brandon said quietly, standing beside her. "I'm just telling the truth," Lauren said. "That's harder than it sounds." A wave rushed in, bigger than the others, and Lauren stepped back quickly. Brandon reached out to steady her by the elbow, his hand warm and solid, and they both froze for a second, the contact holding longer than it needed to. Then they both laughed, too long for such a small moment, the sound carrying over the water like relief. Brandon let go, stepping back, but the awareness between them lingered. They walked back to the house in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that felt easy instead of awkward. Later that night, Erica called with an update. Lauren answered on the first ring. "These filings aren't just dishonest," Erica said, her voice steady but serious. "They're potentially criminal." Lauren's breath caught. "What does that mean?" "It means we're not just looking at a civil case anymore," Erica said. "If the evidence holds, your ex could be facing fraud charges. And that changes everything." The same blogs that once mocked her now flashed her name in bold headlines. But the story still did not belong to her. Erica filed the civil suit on a Tuesday morning. By noon, the complaint was public record. By evening, it was trending. Lauren sat in a Malibu cafe, watching the news cycle explode on every screen around her. Business channels debated whether her claims were real or just another scorned spouse trying to cash in before an IPO. Legal analysts broke down the filing live on air, speculating about her motives, her credibility, her marriage. One headline read, "Ex-wife files explosive lawsuit days before major tech IPO. Is she a victim or a villain?" Another said, "Lauren Pierce claims she built the code, but is she just trying to get paid?" The story was out there, but it still was not hers. The media had reframed her again, not as an engineer fighting for credit, but as a bitter ex-wife looking for revenge. Comment sections filled with people who had never met her, never seen her work, but were certain she was lying. Lauren's decision to stay silent only made it worse. People took her silence as guilt. They said if she was telling the truth, she would defend herself. They said her refusal to speak proved she had something to hide. Brandon wanted to post something on social media, something short and factual that would set the record straight. But Lauren stopped him. "Let them talk," she said. "The evidence will speak louder than I ever could." If the whole world misunderstood your motives, would you speak up or let your actions speak later? Tell me which path you would take. That night, Lauren and Brandon stood in the kitchen of the Malibu house, both holding glasses of wine, the tension of the day still hanging heavy in the air. Brandon reached past her to grab a bottle from the counter, and his hand brushed the small of her back. Just a brief touch, accidental but electric. They both felt it, the awareness, the pull, but neither of them said anything. Lauren stepped away, taking a sip of her wine, her pulse racing. Brandon cleared his throat and changed the subject, asking about the next steps in the case, and they both pretended the moment had not happened. But it had. The next morning, Lauren woke up to a notification on her phone. Colin had posted a video. She opened it, her stomach twisting. Colin sat in front of the camera, looking tired and sincere, wearing a simple t-shirt like he was just a regular guy being attacked by someone unreasonable. He spoke softly, his voice full of hurt and confusion. "I never thought it would come to this," he said. "Lauren and I built something together. I loved her. I still care about her. But this lawsuit, it's not about the truth. It's about pain. And I get it. Breakups are hard. But trying to destroy what we built together because you're angry? That's not okay." He paused, his eyes glistening like he was fighting back tears. "I'm not going to attack her publicly. I'm not going to say things I'll regret. I just hope she gets the help she needs. And I hope people can see this for what it is. A sad situation where someone I loved is now obsessed with tearing me down." He looked directly into the camera. "Pray for her." The video went viral in hours. Hate comments filled her notifications, but the most dangerous message came straight to her private inbox from Colin. The online harassment started small, a few nasty comments here and there, people calling her names, questioning her story. But after Colin's video went viral, it turned into a flood. Her social media mentions were full of strangers telling her she was bitter, jealous, and pathetic. Someone made a fake account pretending to be her, posting made-up confessions about lying for money. Another person found an old photo of her from college and turned it into a meme mocking her appearance. The worst ones were the threats. Messages saying she deserved to be hurt. Messages saying they hoped she lost everything. Messages with her address, her old address, thankfully, but still close enough to make her stomach turn. Lauren sat alone in the guest suite at Brandon's house. The sound of distant waves barely loud enough to calm her, scrolling through endless insults on her phone screen. Her hands shook. Her chest felt tight. She wanted to scream. She wanted to disappear. Have you ever been talked about by people who don't know you at all? Did you keep quiet or fight back? Share your story below. A knock on the door made her jump. Lauren, Brandon's voice, quiet and steady. You okay? She hesitated, then opened the door. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt, no makeup, her eyes red from crying. She looked like a mess, and she knew it. Brandon's expression shifted the second he saw her face. Not pity, something sharper. Anger on her behalf. What happened, he asked. She showed him her phone. He scrolled through a few comments, his jaw tightening with every line he read. This is garbage, he said flatly. None of these people know what they're talking about. They think they do, Lauren said, her voice cracking. And maybe they're right. Maybe I should have just stayed quiet and moved on. No, Brandon's voice was firm. You did the right thing. And if people can't see that, it's because they're not looking. He stepped into the room without asking, and Lauren did not stop him. They sat side by side on the edge of the bed, shoulders touching, the closeness thick with something unspoken. Lauren could feel the warmth of his body next to hers, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. She wanted to lean into him. She wanted to let herself feel safe for just a minute. But she held back. So did he. They sat like that for a long time, not talking, just existing in the same space while the noise outside tried to break her. Finally, Brandon spoke. You don't have to read those comments. You don't owe those people anything. I know, Lauren said quietly. But I can't stop looking. Then let me take your phone for the night, he said. Give yourself a break. She almost said no. But then she handed it over, and the relief was instant. Brandon stood up, still holding her phone. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we keep going. He left, closing the door behind him, and Lauren lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling lighter without the weight of her notifications pressing down on her. But an hour later, curiosity got the better of her. She opened her laptop and checked her email. There was a message from Colin. The subject line read, "Please read this." Her finger hovered over the delete button, but she opened it instead. The email was long, full of apologies and excuses and guilt. He said he missed her. He said he had made mistakes. He said he wanted to fix things, but not through lawyers, just the two of them, talking like adults. The last line made her stomach twist. Meet me alone. No lawyers. There are things you don't know. Have you ever been tempted to go back to someone who hurt you, just because the noise around you felt too loud? Be honest in the comments. Lauren closed the laptop and sat in the dark, her heart pounding, wondering if she was strong enough to ignore him or foolish enough to listen. Sometimes closure is just another word for one more chance to lie. Lauren agreed to meet Colin on one condition. It had to be in public, in the middle of the day, where people could see them. No private offices. No quiet corners. No places where his voice could wrap around her like it used to, making her doubt what she knew was true. They met at a park in Los Angeles on a bright Wednesday afternoon. Joggers ran past. Families spread blankets on the grass. Dogs chased tennis balls. Normal life moved on around them, while their past crumbled on a wooden bench under the California sun. Erica and Brandon were nearby, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough away to stay out of sight. Erica had a small recorder in her bag, audio running, capturing every word Colin said. Lauren wore a wire under her jacket. She had agreed to this meeting not because she wanted closure, but because Erica believed Colin would slip up if he thought he could manipulate her one more time. Colin arrived 10 minutes late, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, looking tired in a way that was probably rehearsed. He sat down next to her, not across from her, violating the space she had tried to create. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. "I wasn't sure you would." Lauren kept her hands in her lap, fingers laced together to stop them from shaking. "You said there were things I didn't know. So talk." Colin leaned in close, his voice dropping to that intimate tone he used to use when they were alone. "I miss you. I know you don't believe that, but I do. This whole thing, it got out of control. The lawyers, the media, the investors, they're all telling me what to say, what to do. But the truth is, I never wanted to hurt you." Lauren felt nothing. No pull, no words, just a faint echo where desire used to live. "You took my work and put your name on it," she said evenly. "You lied to investors. You lied to me. That wasn't the media. That was you." Colin's expression shifted. Just for a second, frustration flashing across his face before he smoothed it back into concern. It was more complicated than that. The investors wanted a single founder. They said it would be easier to market. I was going to fix it later, I swear. But then things moved so fast, and I didn't know how to... "Stop," Lauren said. "I've heard this before. You're going to tell me it was out of your control. You're going to say you were protecting me, or protecting us, or that I just don't understand how business works. But I do understand. You chose yourself. Every single time." Colin leaned back, his tone shifting slightly. "If you take this to trial, you're going to destroy the company. Hundreds of people work there now. People with families, with mortgages, with lives that depend on that paycheck. Do you really want to be responsible for that?" There it was. The guilt trip, the blame. The way he always made her feel like she was the one causing harm by refusing to stay silent. Have you ever sat across from someone you once loved and felt nothing but clarity? Comment clear if you have had that moment. "You should have thought about them before you committed fraud," Lauren said. Colin's jaw tightened. He was losing control of the conversation, and he knew it. "Look," he said, his voice dropping lower, trying to pull her back in with remembered chemistry. "We had something real. You can't tell me you don't remember that. We built something together. We were a team. And if you just drop the lawsuit, we can figure this out. We can restructure the company, put your name back on things, make it right." "You can't make it right," Lauren said. "You can only stop making it worse." Colin's hand reached out, almost touching her knee, and Lauren pulled back sharply. "Don't," she said. He froze, his expression hardening. "You're really going to throw everything away because of pride?" "I'm going to tell the truth," Lauren said. "That's all I've ever wanted to do." Colin stood up, his mask slipping completely now, frustration turning into anger. "You know what your problem is? You think you're the victim here. But you're not. You had everything you needed. A home, a life, a company that was going to make us both rich. And you threw it away because you couldn't handle the fact that I was the one people wanted to see on stage." And there it was. The truth he had been hiding under all the apologies and manipulations. He had never seen her as a partner. He had seen her as support, as background, as the person who made him look good. Lauren stood up slowly, her voice calm and steady. "You're right about one thing. I couldn't handle being erased. And I'm done trying to make you see why that matters." She turned and walked away. Colin called after her, his voice sharp and desperate. "You're making a mistake, Lauren. You think they're going to believe you? You think anyone cares about some angry ex-wife?" She didn't turn around. She just kept walking, past the joggers and the families and the dogs, toward the parking lot where Brandon and Erica were waiting. What Colin didn't know, what he would find out later, when it was too late, was that he had just contradicted himself on record. He had mentioned specific dates, specific investor conversations, specific decisions that directly contradicted the statements his lawyers had filed in court. Erica had it all on tape. For the first time, the money men stopped nodding along and started asking questions. The subpoena arrived at Tyler Briggs's office on a Friday afternoon, delivered by a process server who did not care that Tyler was in the middle of a board meeting. Tyler was one of the lead venture capitalists who had funded Colin's company in the early rounds, writing checks that turned into millions when the valuation climbed. He had believed in Colin, or at least, he had believed in the story Colin sold. Now, sitting in a law firm conference room in downtown San Francisco 3 weeks later, Tyler was sweating under the sharp lighting, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief while Erica Sloan asked questions that had no good answers. "Did you ever meet Lauren Pierce?" Erica asked, her voice calm and precise. "Briefly," Tyler said, "at a few company events." "Did Colin Ward ever describe her role in the company to you?" Tyler hesitated. "He said she helped with some of the early technical work." "Helped," Erica repeated, writing something down. "Not built. Not architected. Helped. That's what he said." Erica slid a printed email across the table. "This is an internal message from you to another partner at your firm, dated 18 months ago. You wrote, 'Colin's wife is the one who actually built the platform. He's the front man.' Do you remember writing that?" Tyler's face went pale. "Ah, yes. But that was just informal conversation. I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean what you wrote?" Erica asked. "Or you didn't mean for anyone to find out you knew the truth?" The room went silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the faint sound of traffic from the street below. Brandon sat in the corner, arms crossed, watching Tyler squirm. He had invested later than Tyler, betting on a company he thought was built on real innovation. Now, watching the deposition unfold, he felt the controlled anger he had been holding back for weeks start to surface. These investors had known, maybe not all of them, but enough of them had known that Colin was not the genius he claimed to be, and they had stayed quiet because the story was easier to sell than the truth. What would you do if telling the truth could cost you millions, but lying could cost you your freedom? Which risk would you take? Erica leaned forward. "Mr. Briggs, did you or anyone at your firm ever advise Colin Ward to remove Lauren Pierce from the cap table or the founding team documentation?" Tyler looked at his lawyer, who nodded slightly. "I advised him to simplify the structure," Tyler said carefully. "Investors prefer a clear narrative. One founder with a strong vision is easier to market than a partnership." "Did you specifically tell him to cut out anyone who didn't look like a textbook founder?" Tyler's lawyer started to object, but Tyler spoke over him. "Yes," he said quietly. "I told him to clean up the cap table. I told him investors would have an easier time if it was just him on paper. I didn't know he would take it this far." Erica made a note and closed her folder. "Thank you, Mr. Briggs. That's all I need for now." After the deposition, Lauren and Brandon stood in the parking garage, the echo of car engines bouncing off the concrete walls. Brandon leaned close to speak quietly, his breath near her ear, and Lauren's pulse raced for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "You were right," he said. "They all knew." Lauren nodded, her hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline of watching Tyler admit the truth on record. "Does it make it better or worse?" "Knowing they knew." "It makes it proof," Brandon said. "And proof is what we need." He stepped back, but the awareness between them lingered, thick and charged in the dim light of the garage. Tyler's admission on record changed everything. If the investors had known Colin was misrepresenting the company's origins, then the IPO filings were not just mistakes. They were part of a coordinated lie. And that meant the fraud went deeper than anyone had realized. It took one judge's signature to freeze hundreds of millions of dollars in place. The hearing took place in a federal courtroom in Northern California. Darkwood benches polished to a shine, the kind of space where whispers echoed and every word mattered. Judge Reynolds sat at the bench, reading through the motion Erica had filed 3 days earlier, a request to temporarily halt the IPO pending a forensic audit of the company's filings. Colin sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with his legal team, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Lauren used to make in a month. His face was calm, controlled, but Lauren could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched too tight. Erica stood and made her argument with surgical precision. She laid out the evidence, Tyler's deposition, the emails showing Colin had been advised to erase Lauren from the paperwork, the commit logs proving her work, the patents filed under his name alone. She spoke clearly, without emotion, letting the facts do the work. Colin's lawyer stood and argued that the claims were baseless, that this was a last-minute attempt by a bitter ex-spouse to derail a legitimate business, that halting the IPO would cause irreparable harm to investors and employees. Judge Reynolds listened to both sides, asked a few pointed questions, and then took a 15-minute recess. When she returned, the courtroom went silent. Based on the evidence presented, Judge Reynolds said, her voice steady and clear. "I am ordering a temporary halt to the initial public offering pending a full forensic audit of the company's intellectual property claims and founding documentation. The court will also be ordering the preservation of all electronic records, including emails, code repositories, and internal communications dating back to the company's inception." The ruling hit like a shockwave. Colin's face went blank. His lawyers started talking urgently in low voices. On the other side of the room, Lauren sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the bench, trying to process what had just happened. She had won. Not the whole case. Not yet. But she had won this. If someone tried to erase you and you finally got validation in public, do you think relief or anger would hit you first? Share your reaction. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. News vans lined the street. Cameras pointed at every exit, waiting for Colin, waiting for Lauren, waiting for anyone who could give him a soundbite. Brandon and Lauren moved quickly through a side door, his hand on her back, guiding her through the crowd. She could hear the reporters shouting questions, but the words blurred together into noise. When they reached the car, Lauren's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the court order Erica had given her. Brandon reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining for a moment that felt both supportive and charged. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Lauren nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight with emotions she did not have names for yet. Relief, fear, anger, vindication, all of it hitting at once. That night, the financial news channels ran the story on a loop. Headlines flashed across screens. Tech IPO halted amid fraud allegations. Judge orders audit of billion-dollar startup. Stock projections that had been climbing for months plummeted in after-hours trading. Colin posted a statement on social media calling the judge's decision a miscarriage of justice, promising to fight the claims and clear his name. But the comments section was different this time. People were starting to ask questions. People were starting to doubt. 3 weeks later, the forensic audit came back. The findings were clear. The core architecture of the platform had been designed and built by Lauren Pierce. The patents filed under Colin Ward's name contained her code, her documentation, her notes. The investors had been sold a story that was not true. The audit triggered a criminal investigation. The man who once bragged about ringing the bell on Wall Street now rehearsed answers with a criminal defense lawyer. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Federal prosecutors filed charges against Colin Ward for securities fraud, wire fraud, and making false statements to investors. The indictment was detailed, citing specific emails, specific misrepresentations, and specific investors who had been misled about the origins of the company's technology. Lauren watched the news from the balcony of Brandon's Malibu house, her phone buzzing nonstop with messages from reporters, former coworkers, and people she had not heard from in years. The story was everywhere. Cable news, tech blog, Twitter trending topics. Colin's face was on every screen. Not smiling this time. Not confident, but tight and stressed as he left meetings with his lawyers, reporters shouting questions he refused to answer. The company he had built on lies was fracturing. Key employees started resigning. Board members distanced themselves. And some of the people who had stayed silent while Lauren was being erased started reaching out privately, sending emails and messages that all said some version of the same thing. "I'm sorry. I should have said something." Lauren read those messages with a mix of anger and exhaustion. They were sorry now that the truth was public, now that staying silent came with consequences. Would you forgive people who stayed quiet while you were being erased if they apologized only after the truth came out? Tell me how you would handle that. Brandon found her on the balcony that evening, the sun setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders pressed together, and they talked quietly about justice, not revenge. "Some of them are asking to meet with me," Lauren said. "People who worked at the company. People who saw what was happening but didn't say anything." "Do you want to meet them?" Brandon asked. Lauren shook her head. "I don't know. Part of me wants to hear them out. Part of me thinks they only care now because the story changed." "You don't owe them forgiveness," Brandon said. "Not until you're ready." She leaned against the railing, feeling the warmth of his body beside her, the proximity thick with unspoken feelings. They had been living in the same house for months now, building a case together, fighting a war together, and somewhere along the way, the line between allies and something more had started to blur. But neither of them had crossed it. Not yet. 2 days later, Erica called with news that made Lauren's stomach drop. Colin's legal team wants to negotiate a settlement, Erica said. They're offering a significant payout in exchange for your silence and a withdrawal of all claims. Lauren sat down slowly. How much? Erica named a number that would change Lauren's life. Enough to never work again. Enough to disappear and start over somewhere quiet and safe. But there's a catch, Erica continued. You would have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. No public statements. No interviews. No credit as co-founder. You take the money and you walk away quietly. Lauren closed her eyes. They want to buy my silence. Yes, Erica said, and I need you to think carefully about what you want. Because once we reject this offer, we go to trial. And trials are public. Trials are brutal. You'll be questioned, cross-examined, and torn apart by his lawyers in front of the world. When do they need an answer? Lauren asked. End of the week. Lauren hung up and stared at the ocean, wondering if there was a price high enough to make her disappear again. They put a dollar value on her silence and slid it across the table like a menu item. The mediation room was on the top floor of a San Francisco high-rise, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city skyline in sharp, clean lines. The space felt cold despite the expensive furniture, like a place designed for transactions, not conversations. Lauren sat on one side of the table with Erica. Across from them sat Colin's legal team, 3 lawyers in tailored suits, carrying folders thick with paperwork. Colin was not there. He had sent his representatives to do the negotiating, keeping himself at a careful distance from the woman he had tried to erase. The lead attorney opened the conversation with polite formality, laying out the terms of the settlement offer. A payout large enough to secure Lauren's future. A restructuring of the company's ownership that would give her equity without public acknowledgement. A carefully worded press release that would describe the resolution as a mutual agreement between former spouses. And in exchange, Lauren would sign away her right to ever speak publicly about what had happened. No interviews. No tell-all book. No keynote speeches about stolen work or erasure or the cost of staying silent. She would take the money and disappear, and the world would never know the full truth. This is a generous offer, the lawyer said, his tone calm and professional. And it allows both parties to move forward without the cost and uncertainty of a trial. Erica glanced at Lauren, waiting for a signal. Lauren looked down at the folder in front of her, at the number printed on the settlement agreement, and thought about what that money could do. She could pay off debt. She could travel. She could start over somewhere no one knew her name or her story. But she would have to buy that life with her silence. If you could trade the truth for enough money to change your life, would you take it? Comment truth or cash and tell me why. Can I take a break? Lauren asked. The lawyers nodded, and Erica stood with her, following her into a narrow hallway outside the conference room. The space was quiet except for the hum of the building's ventilation system and the faint sound of traffic far below. Brandon was waiting in the hallway. He had driven up with them but stayed out of the room, respecting that this decision was Lauren's alone. When he saw her face, he stepped close, his voice low. What are you thinking? He asked. I'm thinking that money could solve a lot of problems, Lauren said quietly. I could walk away. I could be done with all of this. You could, Brandon said, and no one would blame you. Lauren looked up at him, searching his face for judgment or disappointment, but all she saw was understanding. But, she asked. Brandon's hand brushed hers as he spoke. You don't owe anyone your silence. The words sent a shiver through her, not from fear, but from the realization that he was right. She had spent years being silent, years letting Colin take credit, years disappearing into the background because it felt easier than fighting. And it had cost her everything. The money was real. The security it offered was real. But so was the cost of taking it. Lauren took a deep breath and walked back into the conference room. Erica and the lawyers looked up as she sat down. The lead attorney smiled slightly, clearly expecting her to accept. Lauren closed the folder in front of her and slid it back across the table. I'm not for sale, she said. The room went silent. The lawyers exchanged glances. One of them started to speak, but Lauren cut him off. "I didn't fight this hard to be erased again," she said. "I didn't walk away from my life and rebuild from nothing just to disappear for money. You can keep your settlement. I'll see you in court." She stood up. Erica stood with her, gathering her files. And together, they walked out of the mediation room, leaving the lawyers sitting in stunned silence. Outside, in the elevator heading down to street level, Erica looked at Lauren with something close to pride. "That took guts," Erica said. "Or stupidity," Lauren replied, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. "Maybe both," Erica said with a small smile. "But you made the right call." When they reached the lobby, Brandon was waiting by the door. He looked at Lauren's face and knew immediately what she had decided. He didn't say anything. He just held the door open, and they walked out together into the San Francisco afternoon, ready for whatever came next. Winning in court did not erase the years she spent invisible. It only gave her a chance to decide who she wanted to be next. The final judgment came down on a cold morning in February, in the same federal courthouse where this story began. Lauren sat in the gallery with Erica beside her and Brandon one row back, watching Judge Reynolds read the decision in a steady, measured voice that filled the room with authority. After reviewing all evidence presented, including forensic analysis of code repositories, patent filings, and witness testimony, this court finds that Lauren Pierce is the co-founder and lead architect of the technology at the center of this dispute. The defendant, Colin Ward, knowingly misrepresented the origins of this technology to investors and regulatory authorities. The judge continued, detailing the financial damages awarded to Lauren, enough to secure her future, but not enough to undo the years she had lost. Colin was ordered to relinquish control of the company. His equity would be restructured. His name would be corrected in every filing, every patent, every document that had erased her. Lauren sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, listening to the words she had fought so hard to hear. But instead of triumph, she felt something heavier. Emptiness, maybe, or just exhaustion. Winning did not feel like she thought it would. The courtroom emptied slowly. Colin's lawyers packed their briefcases in silence. Colin himself sat frozen at the defense table, staring at nothing, his face pale and tight. He did not look at Lauren. He did not try to speak to her. He just stood when his lawyers told him to and walked out a side door, disappearing into whatever came next for him. Outside, the courthouse steps were packed with reporters. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved toward Lauren's face. Voices shouted over each other, asking how she felt, what she would do next, whether she had any message for Colin Ward. Brandon moved in front of her, his hand warm on the small of her back, shielding her body with his as they pushed through the crowd. She could feel the heat of his palm through her jacket, the steady pressure that said, "I'm here, you're safe, keep moving." They were both hyper-aware of the closeness, of the way his hand fit naturally against her, of the way she leaned into him without thinking. Have you ever gotten what you asked for and still felt strangely empty afterward? Share a time when victory felt complicated. When they finally reached the car and the doors closed behind them, the noise from outside became muffled and distant. Lauren sat in the back seat, staring at her hands, trying to name what she was feeling. "You okay?" Brandon asked quietly from beside her. Lauren nodded, but the motion felt automatic. "I thought I would feel different, like this would fix something, but it just feels like the end of a long fight, not the beginning of something new." "Maybe that's okay," Brandon said. "Maybe you don't have to feel victorious right now. You just have to decide what comes next." Lauren looked at him, this man who had funded her legal battle, given her a place to stay, and never once asked for anything in return. She had spent months living in his house, building a case with his support, and somewhere along the way, he had stopped being a stranger and started being something she did not have a name for yet. "I want to build something," she said suddenly. "Not another company, not another product someone can steal. I want to build access, opportunities, a foundation that funds young women in tech who are trying to break into spaces that don't want them." Brandon's expression shifted, surprise, maybe, or respect. "Using your settlement money?" "Part of it," Lauren said. "I was hoping you would consider matching it through your philanthropy work." Brandon smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "I'd be honored." Lauren felt something loosen in her chest, like a knot she had been carrying for years, finally starting to untie. She had won her name back. Now she wanted to use it for something that mattered. That night, back at the Malibu house, Lauren met with Brandon privately on the deck overlooking the ocean. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and the sound of waves filled the space between them. "I want to do this the right way," Lauren said. "I want it to be mine. My name. My vision. Not hidden behind someone else's brand." "It will be," Brandon said. "I'll fund it. I'll support it. But it's yours to lead." Lauren looked at him, this man who had seen her at her lowest and never once treated her like she was broken. "Why did you help me?" "Really?" Brandon hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Because I've spent years funding companies run by people who lie well. And when you walked in my house with your evidence, I saw someone who just wanted to tell the truth. That felt rare, worth protecting." Lauren's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, but the words would not come. So instead, she just nodded, and they stood together on the deck, watching the sun sink into the Pacific, planning a future that finally belonged to her. For years, her code built someone else's empire. Now, she wanted her work to build something different. Access. The co-working space in Los Angeles was nothing fancy. Just open desks, whiteboards on every wall, and a hum of conversation from other startups grinding through their own challenges. But Lauren loved it. It felt real. It felt like building something from the ground up, the way she had always wanted to. She and Brandon met there 3 times a week, planning the foundation. Lauren brought ideas, scholarship programs for girls in rural areas who wanted to learn coding, mentorship pipelines connecting young engineers with experienced professionals, grants for women trying to launch their own startups without giving up equity to investors who would erase them later. Brandon brought structure, legal frameworks, tax strategies, connections to other philanthropists who might want to get involved. But he never tried to steer. He asked questions. He listened. He took notes. And when Lauren made a decision, he supported it. "What about the name?" Brandon asked one afternoon, standing in front of a whiteboard covered in scribbled notes and flowcharts. Lauren paused, marker in hand. She had thought about this for weeks. She could call it something neutral, something that would not draw attention to her personally. Or she could do what she had never been allowed to do before. "The Lauren Pierce Foundation," she said. "For women in tech who are being overlooked, erased, or told they don't belong." Brandon nodded slowly. "Good. Own it. If you suddenly had the resources to help people in the exact situation you once were in, what would you build first?" Comment your dream project. They worked late that day, sketching out timelines and budgets, mapping scholarship pipelines and partnership possibilities. By the time the sun started to set, they were the only ones left in the space, surrounded by empty coffee cups and whiteboard markers that had run dry. Lauren leaned back in her chair, stretching her arms over her head, exhausted but satisfied. Brandon stood near the window, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline, his profile lit by the fading light. "Thank you," Lauren said quietly. Brandon turned. "For what?" "For letting this be mine. For not trying to take over or fix it or make it yours." Brandon crossed the room and sat on the edge of the desk, near her chair, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I learned a long time ago that the best thing you can do for someone is give them what they need and then get out of the way." Lauren looked up at him, at the way his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. They'd been dancing around this for months, the awareness, the tension, the pull that neither of them had acted on because the timing never felt right. They sat across from each other, the candles flickering between them, and for the first few minutes, they just talked about the foundation, about the logistics of launching a nonprofit, about the applications they had already started receiving from young women who needed scholarships. But eventually, the conversation slowed. The real question hung in the air between them, unspoken but impossible to ignore. Brandon set down his fork and looked at her. "Can I ask you something?" "Okay," Lauren said. "Do you trust me?" Lauren thought about that, really thought about it. Trust was not something she gave easily anymore. Colin had broken that part of her so thoroughly that she had wondered if it would ever heal. But Brandon had never lied to her. He had never tried to control her. He had given her space, support, and respect without asking for anything in return. Yes, she said quietly. Edo. Brandon nodded slowly. I need you to know that I'm not trying to save you. I'm not trying to fix you. I don't see you as a project or a problem. I see you as someone I respect, someone I care about. And if we're going to try this, whatever this is, I need you to believe that. Lauren felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. I do believe that, but I'm scared. Of what? Of getting it wrong again. Of trusting someone and waking up one day to realize they were just better at hiding the lies. Brandon reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was warm, his grip steady. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes, but I can promise I'll never lie to you. And I'll never try to make you smaller, so I can feel bigger. Lauren looked at their hands, at the way his fingers curled around hers, and felt something settle inside her, a quiet certainty that this was different. Have you ever been scared to start a new relationship because the last one nearly broke you? Tell me if you chose to try again or stayed alone. After dinner, they moved to the balcony. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky, and the ocean stretched out endlessly in front of them. They stood close, shoulders almost touching, the space between them electric with possibility. Can I kiss you? Brandon asked, his voice low. Lauren turned to face him, her heart pounding. Yes. The kiss was slow, gentle, not desperate or performative, but real. His hands cupped her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones, and Lauren let herself sink into it. Into the warmth, into the connection, into the feeling of being wanted without being owned. When they finally pulled back, both of them were breathing hard, foreheads resting together. Come inside, Brandon whispered. Lauren nodded, and they walked back into the house together, hands intertwined. Later, in his room, there were no words. Just quiet touches, shared breath, and the slow, intentional intimacy of two people choosing each other without pressure, without performance, without anything but respect. And when Lauren woke up the next morning in his bed, sunlight streaming through the windows, she did not feel regret or fear. She felt peace. She reached for her phone on the nightstand and saw an email notification. The subject line made her sit up straight. Keynote speaker invitation. Tech Innovators Conference, San Francisco. She opened it, her heart racing. Dear Ms. Pierce, we would like to invite you to be a keynote speaker at this year's Tech Innovators Conference. We are looking for voices that represent resilience, innovation, and leadership in the tech industry. Your story and your work speak to the future we want to build. They were not asking her to speak as Colin's ex-wife. They were asking her to speak as an engineer, as a founder, as herself. Lauren turned to Brandon, who was just waking up beside her, and showed him the email. He read it, then smiled. You're going to say yes, right? Lauren smiled back. Yeah, I am. The world finally wanted to hear her, but the most important part of her story was something she had never told anyone, not even Brandon. The conference hall in San Francisco was massive, rows of seats stretching back into shadows, a stage lit by spotlights that made everything feel larger than life. Lauren stood backstage, listening to the hum of conversation from the audience, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had written and rewritten her speech a dozen times. She had practiced in front of mirrors, in front of Brandon, in front of Erica. But now, standing in the wings waiting for her introduction, all those words felt fragile and uncertain. What if they did not believe her? What if they saw her as the bitter ex-wife, no matter what she said? Brandon found her in the backstage area, his hand finding hers in the dim light. You're going to be great. What if I'm not? Lauren whispered. Then you'll be honest, Brandon said. And that's better than great. The MC called her name, and the audience applauded. Lauren took a deep breath and walked out onto the stage. The spotlight was blinding at first, but as her eyes adjusted, she could see faces in the crowd. Engineers, founders, investors, students. People who had come to hear her story. Lauren stepped up to the microphone and began. My name is Lauren Pierce, and for a long time, I did not exist. She told them about the early days, the cramped apartment, the late nights, the code she had written while someone else took credit. She told them about the patents filed under the wrong name, the IPO documents that erased her, the years she spent invisible. But then she told them about the moment she decided to stop being silent. I could have taken the settlement, Lauren said, her voice steady now. I could have walked away with enough money to disappear and never look back. But I realized that silence had already cost me too much. My work, my name, my sense of who I was. And I was not willing to pay that price anymore. The audience was silent, leaning forward, listening. So I fought. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted to destroy anyone, but because I wanted my name back. And I wanted to make sure that the next woman who builds something real does not have to fight as hard as I did to be seen. Lauren paused, then made a decision she had not planned to make. I want to tell you something I have not told anyone publicly before, she said. When I won my settlement, I took most of it and put it into a foundation. The Lauren Pierce Foundation for Women in Tech. It funds scholarships, mentorship programs, and grants for women who are trying to break into spaces that do not want them. Because I realized that the best use of my money was not luxury or security. It was access. The audience erupted in applause. People stood. The sound washed over Lauren like a wave, and for the first time, she let herself feel proud. Would you be willing to trade personal wealth for impact if you had already been robbed once before? Be honest. What would you keep for yourself? When she walked off stage, Brandon was waiting in the wings. His eyes were shining, his expression a mix of pride and something deeper. He pulled her into a quiet corner, away from the stage managers and other speakers, and kissed her, hard and urgent, and full of everything he had been holding back. You were incredible, he whispered against her lips. Lauren laughed, breathless. I think I just gave away all my money on live television. Good, Brandon said. Now everyone knows who you really are. They stood there, wrapped in each other, until someone came to tell Lauren there were reporters asking for interviews. She pulled back, smoothing her dress, trying to compose herself. But before she walked away, she turned back to Brandon. Thank you, she said, for everything. Brandon shook his head. You did this. Not me. Lauren smiled. We did it together. That night, as they drove back to Malibu, Lauren's phone buzzed with a news alert. Colin Ward accepts plea deal. Sentencing set for next month. Lauren stared at the headline, her stomach twisting. The case was over. Colin had admitted guilt. And now, the court was asking if she wanted to speak at his sentencing hearing. She did not know if she had anything left to say to him. We are back outside that courthouse, the one from the beginning. Only now you know everything that brought her here. Lauren stood on the steps of the federal courthouse in Oakland, the same building where this story began. Press cameras lined the street. Reporters shouted questions. The morning air was cool and sharp, and the sun was just starting to break through the fog. Inside, Colin Ward was being sentenced. Lauren had been given the option to speak, to deliver a victim impact statement, to tell the judge and the courtroom and the world exactly what Colin had taken from her. Erica had prepared remarks. Brandon had offered to sit beside her for support. But Lauren had made a different choice. She was not going to speak. The sentencing hearing lasted less than an hour. Lauren sat in the gallery, silent, while other victims gave statements. Employees who had lost their jobs when the company collapsed. Investors who had lost money. People whose lives had been disrupted by Colin's lies. The judge read through the plea agreement, detailing the charges Colin had admitted to and the sentence he would serve. Fraud, misrepresentation, false statements to federal authorities. Colin sat at the defense table, shoulders slumped, his face carefully neutral. His lawyers had coached him well. No emotion, no outbursts, just quiet acceptance of the consequences. When the judge asked if Lauren Pierce wanted to make a statement, the courtroom went silent. Every eye turned toward her. Lauren stood slowly. She met the judge's gaze and spoke clearly. No, Your Honor. I have nothing to say. The judge nodded. Very well. Colin was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, followed by supervised release and restitution payments. When the marshals led him out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he did not look at Lauren. He kept his eyes forward, his face blank, and disappeared through a side door. Lauren sat perfectly still, watching him go, and felt nothing. No triumph, no anger, just quiet acceptance that this chapter of her life was finally over. Outside, the press was waiting. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved toward her face. Reporters shouted the same questions they always did. How did she feel? What did she want to say to Colin? Was she satisfied with the sentence? Lauren did not answer. She simply walked down the courthouse steps, Brandon beside her, his fingers loosely laced with hers. There was no dramatic kiss, no tearful speech, no moment designed for cameras. Just a steady presence and a shared look that said they were facing forward together. At the bottom of the steps, Lauren paused and turned back one last time, looking up at the courthouse that had held so much of her pain and her fight. Then she turned away from the cameras and walked toward the car, toward the life she had chosen, toward the future she had built. Tell me in the comments, if you were Lauren, would you have spoken or walked away in silence? She did not clap. She did not smile. She did not say a word. She simply turned away from the cameras and walked toward the life she chose. Proof that sometimes the strongest revenge is not a speech or a headline. It is the quiet decision to live well.